The state government today dotted the I's and crossed the T's of its contract with the consortium that will build the first stage of its contentious East-West Link project. The road will cost $6.8 billion to build, but the state will also have to pay the East-West Consortium to run the road for the next 25 years. How much will that cost? Well, we don't know. The detail of the contract is also secret, including the amount of compensation Victoria is up for if Labor wins the November election and stops the project. To examine all this, I'm joined now by Professor of Law Michael Crommelin, a man who Labor rang for informal advice on this project.
Good evening, Josie.
Stephen Martin, the Chief Executive of the Committee of Economic Development of Australia.
Thank you.
And Dr John Stone, a transport and planning expert from Melbourne University.
Hi.
Welcome to you all.
Thank you.
Stephen, starting with you, your research organisation represents, amongst many, the big banks and big business groups, so it would seem logical that you'd support such a project, do you?
What we support is good policy outcomes, good public policies that sees government money spent wisely. We want to see projects that in fact are going to add to the productivity and the capacity of the community, and what we want to see, of course, is value for money, but we want to see it all, of course, that it's spelled out in terms of cost-benefit analyses and ways in which you can make a very informed judgment of the outcomes.
Just on that, the government has signed contracts as of Monday, but the big question, of course, is what happens to those contracts if Labor wins. This is what Labor leader Daniel Andrews has to say on those contracts.
The contracts are not worth the paper they're written on. That is our strong legal advice. Any side deals that this government has done in secret are not only dodgy, but they're equally of no legal value.
When we enter into a contract like that, we expect the government of Victoria to honour it, and we're a commercial entity, and that's the way we'll go forward.
So, Professor Crommelin, is Daniel Andrews correct when he says they're not worth the paper they're written on?
Well, Josie, there are several legal issues here, important legal issues, and not all of them are easily resolved. The first is whether the approval of the project in the first place by the Planning Minister is valid. That's the subject of litigation, be decided by the Supreme Court after the election, not until the middle of December. The second is if that approval is not valid, does that mean the contracts are invalid? That's the matter on which the Labor Party got advice from Ray Finkelstein and other senior barristers. They said that the contracts would be invalid if the approval was invalid, and I think there's a strong case for that.
What if the contracts are valid?
If the contracts are valid, I think there's still a big issue for the Victorian Parliament after the election, because the Victorian Parliament, of course, can abrogate those contracts and it can remove all right to compensation.
So if Labor had a majority in both houses, it could, through the Parliament rather than the courts, quash the contract?
Yes, the government can't do it, but the Parliament could.
Okay. I guess the other issue, that apart from the legal issues, is obviously the population growth is a huge issue for both parties, no matter who wins the election. This is what Transport Minister Terry Mulder had to say.
This is not a matter of should we or shouldn't we. This is a project we have to deliver. We can't have a growing population, growing traffic volumes, growing freight volumes, and think we can exist with the Westgate Bridge with 200,000 vehicles going across it now, and those numbers are just going to increase. The cost to the state is going to be unbearable, and living is going to be unbearable.
So, Dr Stone, does he have a point?
It's clear that we have to deal with population growth and we have to deal with the transport problems that brings. But this project stops us doing that because if the cost-benefit analysis is what we think it is, it'll be draining money from the state budget, and it'll also be costing us in terms of the revenues that we have to pay for tolls. So all of those things mean putting good public transport in place is going to be that much more difficult, and it's that we need to do to deal with this problem.
On that point, though, the Prime Minister, Tony Abbott's made it clear that he will fund road projects, but he won't fund public transport projects. This is what he said about the East-West Link.
The money that we've given is for East-West Link. It's for East-West Link. And if contracts are torn up against all principle, against all precedent, and East-West Link doesn't go ahead, that money goes back to Canberra.
Will you just pay that money back?
Not at all, Josie.
You won't?
Not at all. Of course, a responsible government, a Labor government, would sit down and talk with Tony Abbott about places where that money could be spent.
So don't you then take the money and run while it's there?
It's a very 1960s sort of view that roads are good, public transport is bad, when we really need to be looking at how we make the public transport system work. In Western Australia they did that. They took money that was earmarked for roads and spent it on public transport, and now you get bipartisan support for public transport projects, and that's the direction we need to head in Melbourne. And that's what, sitting down, as Daniel Andrews said, with the public behind them, I think Tony Abbott would have to move.
Stephen Martin, you used to be a federal Labor parliamentarian. In your experience, has a project ever been as politicised as this one?
Have I seen something as divisive as this? Probably not in recent history, for the simple reason I think that the public is much more motivated these days, and they have that opportunity. They want information, and rightly so. But equally, I think if you look at it from the proponent's point of view, they have entered into a contract with the state government to build something that the state government wants built. Some of the information certainly is missing as to what compensation might be there if it doesn't happen. The issue that we've just discussed about whether or not an incoming Labor government would give the money back. Look, good luck with that.
How tricky a position are Labor in?
Well, I think Labor's in a very difficult position indeed, because it's highly unusual, of course, for a government to back away from, fail to honour its contractual obligations. This is a highly unusual situation, and it's certainly not a desirable situation for the state of Victoria.
It is quite unusual that a government would be rushing to sign contracts with all these things undecided right before an election. It should be very easy for them to say, well, let's just put it to the people, rather than it's the Napthine government that's putting the Victorian people in a difficult situation.
Well, I agree with that too. I think one of the features of this whole project and the way it's been managed is the absence of any very obvious role for Parliament to play. That's why the question of whether Parliament will come in at the 11th hour in rather dramatic circumstances is before us at all.
Who knows what will happen next with this project? No one can really tell. Thank you all very much for coming in today.
Thanks, Josie.